Good evening and welcome to our webinar. It's Finding and Getting Small Business Grants. It's being brought to you tonight by the Buffalo Niagara chapter of SCORE. And I'm your workshops coordinator, Ted Galantowitz. I'm pleased to serve as your host for tonight's SCORE webinar. Before I hand over the controls to our presenter, a few announcements. This session is being recorded, and the recording link will be emailed to all attendees by tomorrow. You'll also be receiving a PDF copy of tonight's presentation slides. All attendee microphones during the webinar will be muted. If you have a question or a comment, please use the Zoom chat function. I'll be monitoring the chat function during the presentation, and we'll be referring any questions that come in to our presenter. Within the next 48 hours, you're going to be receiving an evaluation form, and it'll be coming via email. We ask you to go ahead and please go ahead and fill out the evaluation form and return it via email. I'd like to let you know that this webinar is part of SCORE's commitment to promote the success of small business. We do this through local and nationally available training events, one-on-one mentoring, and by providing numerous informational resources. SCORE is the volunteer arm of the Small Business Administration, and we have hundreds of chapters and thousands of unpaid volunteers throughout the United States. Our Buffalo chapter has about 50 members, and a good percentage of those are doing mentoring. Our mentoring is free and it's confidential, and most of our educational events are free. So you can contact us at buffaloniagara.score.org. And we also encourage you to take a look at our national website, score.org. Lots of resources on both of those sites. Please note that our Buffalo Niagara chapter has scheduled the following webinar workshops from now into October. On September 7th, that's Wednesday, September 7th at 9 in the morning, our partners from Microsoft will be presenting Intermediate Microsoft Word. On Thursday, September 8th at 6 p.m., we will have a session on small business legal issues. On Monday, September 12th, at 6 o'clock in the evening, we will have a session on Franchising 101. On Wednesday, October 12th, we will again be working with our Microsoft partners, and the presentation will be on intermediate level Excel. That's at 9 a.m. in the morning start time. And on Thursday, October 13th and Thursday, October 27th, we have a two-evening series. It is a marketing series for entrepreneurs. And we have a really exciting consultant who's going to be presenting in that two-part series. Now, you can go ahead and register for these webinars, these workshops that I've just indicated. And for others that are going to appear, you can register for them by going to the buffaloniagara.score.org website. And now let's get to our presentation. Our presenter tonight is Christine Howard, and she's the CEO and founder of E.B. Howard Consulting. Since starting E.B. Howard Consulting in 2013, her company has secured well over $60 million in funding. I think that's an old figure, Christine, but you can update me on that one. She's created hundreds of customs funding roadmaps for startups and small businesses, and she's written hundreds of successful proposals for clients. Christine is passionate about equal access for funding, to funding for women and minority-owned startups. And in 2020, just an interesting fact, she launched startupfundhub.com, a self-service subscription database for non-dilutive funding. We're pleased and honored to have Christine presenting tonight. And with that said, Christine, the microphone and the controls are yours. Go ahead and open up your microphone and your video, and I will close mine, and you can go ahead and begin your presentation.
Well, thank you for having me. You are correct. That is an old figure. We've lost track some time ago of what that number is. I think we're well over 100 million at this point of securing funding for small businesses. But for tonight, let's talk about grants. So here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about everything grants, types of grants, funding basics, how to protect yourself and your business. I'm going to address some myths and urban legends. There's quite a few of them out there in the grant industry. And then we also have some resources that I can share with you on how to find funding and some opportunities that might be available for you. And at the end, we're going to open it up to Q&A. A lot of the questions I'm hoping I can answer for you throughout this presentation. But if not, please feel free to put it in chat, and hopefully we can answer your question at the end during Q&A. So we'll get started here. So everything grants. I'm going in the wrong direction. There we go. There we go. Everything grants. Types of grants. So there are four main types of grants. There are competitive based, meaning based upon its merit. There's formula-based, based upon a predetermined award amount. There's a continuation, which this means you've already received grant funding and you maybe have to submit an update report and you will get a renewal grant. Then there's pass-through funding, and this is typically issued by a federal agency. So four main types to be aware of. But with those types, there are kinds of grants. And they can come from really three different sources. They can come from the government, they can come from corporate entities, or foundations. And with the government space, we have federal funding, and they can be coming from agencies like the National Institute of Health, the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense. You may have heard of something called Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, that all comes through the federal government. Then there's state and local grants, and you may hear things about economic development or block grants. Those are typically state and local grants, all coming through the government. At the corporate level, sometimes we see Fortune 500 or private businesses having grants. A good example of this would be like Johnson & Johnson or JP Morgan Chase. They sometimes have funding opportunities for innovators in the research sector or small business sector. Then we have foundations, and you tend to see them in two different pathways, national and local. With the national level, you probably are familiar with the Gates Foundation or Ford Foundation or the Kauffman Foundation. They tend to have a nationwide reach. At the local level here in the Buffalo Niagara area, you've probably heard of the Oshai Foundation or the more popular Ralph Wilson Foundation. So each of them different kinds, different types. And again, you will see some things coming out of the federal government. There'll be, merit-based. You may see reissuance grants come through. Some will be merit-based, and everyone does it slightly differently. But it's important to know what kind it is and where it's coming from, or the type and kind. So some funding basics to bring you up to speed on. So some tips. Do not apply for funding if you're not eligible or do not qualify. And I say this with read the solicitation, read the directions, and know if you're eligible. If you do not have a plan on what you want to do with the funding, do not apply. If it is not a priority for you as a business, meaning you are prioritizing the endeavors that you're proposing to put forward or the grant application itself, do not apply. And if you do not have stable funding coming in the door, either revenue or maybe you have angel investors or venture capital, probably I would encourage you, don't apply, simply because funders want to see that there's other funding coming in. They don't want to be the sole source of an funding coming in the door. So they want to not be the only one on the table. Tip number 2, grants have requirements. Those requirements are dictated by the government, also by the IRS. We'll get into this a little bit later about how this comes into play. And the requirements are specific to the grant. So not every single grant opportunity that you run into will have the same requirements. They may have different allowables on how you can spend your money from the grant. They may have different requirements for documents. So be advised, grants have requirements. It is okay to say no to a funding opportunity if it does not align with your mission and vision as an organization. It is better to have that funding opportunity fit what you are trying to do rather than you trying to fit that funding opportunity. It is also okay to say no to a funding opportunity if you don't have the capacity to manage the grant should it be awarded. It's okay. If you cannot commit to the funding opportunity, meaning making sure things happen as you said they were going to happen, don't apply for that funding opportunity. And this probably will date me a little bit, glamored by the money. If you are glamored by the money, if we just got $100,000, we could do X. If we just got $50,000, we could do X. Glamored by the money, it is okay to say no to a specific funding opportunity. So it is absolutely okay to say no. Follow the rules. You must follow the rules and the guidelines exactly. If they are asking for something to be presented in a certain way, follow the rules. Don't change it because you think it flows better or that you have a better way of presenting something. If they're asking for a typewritten response, 4 pages long, give them a typewritten response 4 pages long. Respond to all sections of the solicitation as well. Don't overlook sections. They're looking for you to respond to all sections and adhere to any format restrictions. So if they say that they want it Arial 12, single spaced, give them Arial 12, single space. Don't double space, don't put it in Calibri, don't do something else. So follow the rules. Call the program officer. If you have found a funding opportunity and you really, really like it, and you think, this would be a perfect fit for what we're trying to do, call them. Call them, ask questions about the deadline, ask them about informational webinars. It's okay to call and ask questions. We know in the grant professional space, 85% of all successful grant seekers have had contact with a program officer. So it is in your best interest to call the program officer when you find a funding opportunity. Reach out to them. Timelines. This is my personal advice for you when you run into a funding opportunity and what we do at my firm. If you run into a funding opportunity and it's less than 30 calendar days away, don't go near it. No good comes from racing to the deadline. And I have this little quote over here: poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Most grant applications will take anywhere, really competitive grant applications, especially anything coming from the government, will take anywhere between 150 to 200 hours of time. So nothing less than 30 calendar days away. We always tell our clients, you want to be done with that proposal 7 calendar days in advance of that deadline as well. And that 7 calendar day window, that means no more edits, no more modifications. You're not waiting on documentation from anyone. You were done. And you use that 7 calendar day window to submit your proposal no later than 1 day before it is due. Because as I say, I love this farmer's commercial. Probably you've seen it. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And if the power can go out, it will. If your internet can go down, it will. If your computer will crash, it will. So don't leave that to chance. So I say, follow the timeline, no less than 30 calendar days away from the deadline. Be done with your proposal 7 calendar days in advance of that deadline and submit at least 1 day ahead of that deadline. Then you know you're in the clear. So there's my thing again. Okay, so funding basics. Check for eligibility and qualification. There's nothing like putting in time and effort into a proposal only to find out you're not eligible. Do it. Double check your qualifications, make sure you're eligible. Call the program officer if it's not clear to you if you're eligible. It's okay to call them and get a hold of them or email them. Do the proper research. Make sure it aligns with what you are trying to do. As I mentioned earlier, it is better that the funding opportunity matches what you are trying to do as opposed to you trying to match the funding opportunity. My favorite piece of advice, excuse me, as you are looking at completing the narrative or the bulk of the proposal, when you see phrasing statement of need, this means you need to state the problem and then your proposed solution. So when you see statement of need, state what the problem is, state what your solution is. Very simple to do. Give an overview of your organization with an executive summary. So in the beginning, when they're asking for an executive summary, give an overview of who you are. What do you do? What do you focus on? Also, be aware of your audience. Know that your audience may be focused on innovation or commercialization. How are you going to commercialize your product? How are you going to commercialize your business? Be aware of who potentially could be reading your proposal. If you're applying to the DoD, Department of Defense, what are you doing that's in alignment with the DoD's objectives? What are you doing that's in alignment with the Department of Education if you find a grant opportunity through the Department of Education? So be aware of your audience. Funding, more on funding basics. As I mentioned before, follow the directions. It's critically important. Well-funded proposals or well-written proposals, those proposals that are funded have followed the directions. And if you want funding, you need to follow the directions. You need to be prepared to say how you will measure success. This is commonly referred to as evaluation. So how will you know that you are successful? You have to be able to speak to that in your proposal. You should also be able to speak to historical results. Funders are not keen on funding you if you cannot demonstrate capability or historical results of previous success. So if you've started a business before, tell them you've started a business before. If you have created something with machine learning and AI and you sold it off for whatever, you exited out of that company, say that you've done that before. You've commercialized a product before. Let them know that you have experience doing this. Surrounding the budget, understand and know how much to ask for. It is critically important that you follow the rules for budgets in funding opportunities. You know, a lot of grants have specific parameters on how much can be paid to sub-awardees or consultants. Some of them even have stipulations on travel, equipment. So you need to be aware and understand what and how much you can ask for. More on funding basics. Know when funding decisions are made. If decisions are made after you need the money, should you even bother applying? The way you find this out, read the solicitation. They will tell you when they're going to make a funding decision. And if it's not clear in the solicitation, contact the program officer to find out when they're going to make a decision. A lot of times at the federal level, it'll be 6 months from the due date of an application. So for example, if an application is due January 1st to the federal government, you may not know the outcome of that application until July 1st. That's 6 months from now. When can you expect the dollars to be in hand? This also is sometimes noted in the solicitation. They're pretty clear about the expectations of this at the federal level and in any government agency. But foundations are not obligated to tell you in the solicitation, so it's best to get a hold of them. Sometimes those dollars are not available for another 3 to 6 weeks after you find out that you've been awarded the grant. So it's important that you find out how will they disperse those dollars. And again, I go back to, you've heard me mention this before, am I fitting myself into what the funder wants, or does the funder fit with me? And that is critically, critically important. You don't want to try to match what the funder is doing. Instead, the funder should be aligning with what you're trying to do. Protecting yourself and your business. No amount of money will make a bad business idea work. So do your homework and get good advice to determine if your idea is worth pursuing with or without a grant. Talk to your SCORE mentors. They will have good advice for you. And if you don't have a SCORE mentor, I have a slide at the end. You can contact SCORE and they will help you locate a SCORE mentor. If a business idea is not worth pursuing without a grant, it's probably not worth pursuing. And unfortunately, that is the truth among small business community, among grant opportunities. So be advised of that. If it is a true grant opportunity, you will be able to find the application, the guidelines, and organizational contract. Hearing that a friend of a friend got a grant, and this is no guarantee that such a grant exists. Find the source of the funding opportunity, find the contact info, find the guidelines. Make sure you have all the information about that opportunity. Do not rely on money-back guarantees without looking at the requirements. They can be designed so that it is nearly impossible to meet all that is required to get your money back. Red flags to be aware of surrounding protecting yourself and your business. Anyone who implies, promises, or guarantees that they can get you a grant, that should be a red flag for you. Anyone who has any kind of success percentage. For example, if they say, we have an 85% success ratio without evidence, that should be a red flag for you. Anyone who requires you to pay for 100% of the service in advance, that should be a red flag for you. Please note, it is common among grant writers and consultants to ask for a deposit up front, and it's typically half of their service fee. Advertising in recognized media outlets or on the internet does not guarantee the legitimacy of the company behind the ad. Watch out for those. Sometimes they are less than credible entities. So be careful of that. Check the state attorney general's office for complaints about a company before sending any money to them, specifically grant consultants. I would normally, I say, check the attorney general's office. I'm not a big fan of the Better Business Bureau simply because they require businesses to pay an annual fee to be on their list. But the attorney general's office, the website's right here, it's a much more valid and reliable source. Be very concerned if you are asked to pay to apply for a grant. Now, do not confuse that with an accelerator or a pitch competition. It is quite common to pay a small fee for a pitch competition or an accelerator, but grants, you should not have to pay for a grant. Myths and urban legends. Grants are not free money. You are entering into a contract to do what you said you were going to do with their money. You must do what you said you are going to do. Myth number one, grants are free, easy money. Time is a valuable commodity, and I like to paraphrase this from this author. Unless your time is worth nothing, free isn't really free. Grant writing is not a get-rich-quick scheme. Many funders take months to make a decision, and some decisions they only make once a year. I use the example of the Department of Education's SBIR funding line, Small Business Innovation Research through the Department of Education. They have one application solicitation a year. It usually opens up in January. It's typically due in March or April. They make one decision a year. They typically award between 11 and 15 grants. It's not a lot. It's highly competitive. Once a year. That's what the Department of Ed does for small business innovation research. And of course, time is money. And if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. So grant writing is not easy work at all.
Hey, Christine?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I stop? There are two comments in the chat which you might want to address.
Sure.
One is, according to the funding basics, you stated not to apply if there is no stable funding because grantors stipulate they do not want to be the only source of income. But in all honesty, in this climate, are there any grants available for startups that need grants or resources to need funding for stability?
There may be some opportunities, and we'll talk about some resources for that at the end. Some funders, with the state of our economy and with pandemic, there are some opportunities out there, but you have to really read their directions and instructions very carefully to make sure that they're not asking you to disclose revenue or to disclose if you have investors already. So you have to be very careful with that. But we'll talk about some of those opportunities towards the end here.
And one other question regarding paying for a grant, what if there is an application fee? Is that an automatic red flag?
I caution you on it. There's one specific funding opportunity that I steer our clients away. It's called the Amber Grant, and there is a fee for it. I think it's something like $25 or something like that, and maybe $30. I'm not keen on paying a $25 fee, but their award amount is somewhere between $5,000 and $50,000, depending on the time of year and what they're doing. I'm okay with that, but if you run into something that the grant opportunity is, let's hypothetically say $5,000, and they want you to pay a $500 fee, if the price seems ridiculous, I wouldn't go near it. But if it's something nominal, like $15 or $5 or $25, I would be okay with that because they're probably using that to pay their administrative staff and not using grant dollars. The dollars that they would award in a grant. But I would just keep an eye on it. I'm not a big advocate for it. That doesn't mean every single one is bad, but that's my own personal particularity. I tend to not like to steer our clients towards anything that would require paying a fee.
And one last one here. Are there any grants for home-based businesses?
Typically, so our economy has gone more remote. So home-based is another way of saying remote. A lot of times funders are aware that we are now in a more mobile, remote-based economy. So I would encourage you to read the directions on funding opportunities that come up. If you find something that fits what you're trying to do, double check and make sure that you're eligible just because you're working out of your house. Heck, my company, when I started it in 2013, we started out immediately remote based. Everyone who works for me works out of their house. So, it's quite common, and funders are aware of that. They're not expecting you to have a storefront or an office front. They probably do want you to have like a professional mailbox or, a place that they can send legal forms, but double check the directions, and you can always get a hold of the program officer and find out if, that is an eligibility requirement. More often than not, funders get it, that it's, we're working in a mobile economy now, so they get it.
All right, and one last one, and then I'll stop right there. Do grants typically look at the owner or the business? My team and I recently bought an existing business. I assume we can use the previous revenue of the company prior to our acquisition when delving into financials.
You know what? You ask a really good question. So we tell our clients they look at everything. Funders are going to look, if it's coming out of the government, they're going to ask you to turn in your resume, and your resume has to demonstrate skills and experience and competency to lift the project off the ground. So they look at you as an individual, but then they also look at the business, and some funding opportunities ask for something called a commercialization plan. And that is very similar to a business plan. So they look at all aspects of the business, not just what the business is doing and what you plan to be doing, but they look at the leadership. They look at who's going to be leading that project and making sure that they're competent and capable of lifting that project off the ground. So in your case, because you bought a business and there's prior revenue history, as long as everything's on the up and up, you should be okay. But again, I always go back to talk to the program officer, make sure they're aware of your circumstances, make sure you're still eligible, even though you just took over. It shouldn't be an issue, but I would always err on the side of transparency on an application and talk to the program officer to make sure that they're well aware of what's going on, and then go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Myth number 2, one size fits all. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this from potential clients. We want just one grant, then we can send it out to as many funders as possible. There's nothing more irritating for a funder to see grants copied and pasted from other funding grants or other grants in general that isn't tailored and in alignment with what that funder is trying to do. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had a client come in the door, show me an application that they've submitted to the National Institute of Health and want to, and have applied to the National Science Foundation, 2 different agencies in the federal government. And their NSF application is referencing NIH, and, or, you know, we've had other instances where it's NSF referencing NIH and NIH referencing NSF. So I wouldn't take it as one size fits all. And my big takeaway for this is don't rinse and repeat. Each and every single grant opportunity you run into requires tailoring, uniquely crafted language. Yes, there's some things that you can port over, and there are some things, you know, some grants where they may limit your character space. So they may say, oh, you can only write 500 words, whereas another grant opportunity expects 1,000 words on the same topic. So you have to be prepared to expand on it and give a more detailed answer. So I would say be very, very careful with the mindset of one size fits all, because that is not the case at all in the funding space. Myth number 3, everybody else is getting funded for my project, so I will too. Not necessarily. Funders want to know that the projects they're funding are both needed and innovative. For example, if there are 5 different children's homes in the area running under capacity and you propose building a 6th one, you're not likely to get funded. So I would say, I go back to do your research, find out what's out there, make sure you're not proposing reinventing the wheel. That's important. Make sure that what you are proposing to do is innovative. Doesn't necessarily have to be groundbreaking, but it should be innovative. You should be connecting interventions to demonstrable needs. So if you're going to do something, you want to make sure that it is actually needed. You know, I go to the medical industry. We obviously need a cure for cancer. Well, there needs to be an intervention for that. And we have to figure out what that is. So, you know, just saying that, well, I'm going to cure cancer, that's not enough. What's your intervention? They want to know, what are you doing that's unique and novel and innovative? They want to know, what's the new hot whiz bang? So make sure that you are clear about how you are different and how you are setting yourself apart from everyone else that's applying. Myth number 4, grants are only available at certain times of the year. Grants in general are available year-round throughout the funding cycle. Where it becomes difficult is some agencies, some foundations will only issue an opportunity once a year. So I go back to the example, the Department of Education for their SBIR opportunity, that happens once a year. Whereas National Institute of Health's opportunity for SBIR can happen 3 times a year. So it depends on the agency, depends on what's going on. There is no right time of year for grants. There isn't a better time of year for grants. I always say now's the time. Now's the time to do the research and see what's out there, see what's coming through the pipeline. There isn't one time of the year that's better than others, specifically in the small business space. Myth number 5, all grants do not have to be paid back. Now, that's not necessarily true. I would say the majority of grants do not have to be paid back. The only time you're paying back a grant is if you don't use all of your funds, maybe you return unused funds, or we'll talk a little bit more about this, if there's inappropriate use of funds, then you have to hand that money back. Myth number 6, I don't meet the eligibility, but my program is an awesome program and I will apply for the grant anyway. I go back to read the directions, double check that you're eligible, You may have a great program, but if you don't meet that eligibility, don't waste your time and effort applying for something that you're not eligible for. So it's so critically important that you read the directions and make sure that you're eligible. Myth number 7, it's okay to spend some of the grant money we received on something other than what we told the grantor we were going to spend money on. Yeah, wrong. That's a big false right there. You can only spend money on what the grant indicates you can spend money on. And I got this recent article here from August 2nd out of the San Francisco Art Commission director used grant money for a trip to Hawaii. The former director of San Francisco Art Commission has been fined $20,000 and she admitted to diverting grant money to finance and personal vacation in Hawaii. You can Google this. It happened. And this is not the only story that happens. And she kind of got lightly dinged. There are far worse punishments that the IRS can levy or a granting agency can levy if they chose to do so. She just was fined $20,000. That's pretty mild. So I would say if you say you're going to do something, it is always best to do that in your grant application. Myth number 8, writing a grant is an instant solution to your funding problems. This may solve some of your problems, but not all of them. Usually grants are applied in specific categories within a budget based on the grant rules and regulations. So for example, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, that money that you could potentially receive as a small business, if you're developing something with machine learning or AI technology, or maybe you've got a biomedical sensor device or whatever it is that you have, that money is meant to pay to demonstrate feasibility or proof of concept, which means you have to hire engineers and developers, and they're expecting you to hire who you say you're going to hire and pay them what you say you're going to pay them. It's not going to solve the problem of solvency of the company or revenue coming in the door. So you have to be very careful. And I go back to my number 1 theme, read the directions. A lot of times there's specificity on how you can spend the money and where you can spend that money. So it may not solve the problems you think it's going to solve. So be advised of that. Myth number 9, this is one of my favorite myths I love dispelling on a fairly regular basis. Paying for proposal preparation by incentive, contingency, or success fee. Some unscrupulous consultants will attempt to charge you a contingency fee being paid upon the outcome of the grant award. Should your grant be awarded, you are contractually obligated to pay them that percentage, whatever you agreed to with them. And sometimes that percentage can range between 4% and 10% of the grant award. And if you're submitting a budget with a proposal of $256,000, you could be paying that consultant between 10 grand and 25 grand. It's a steep bill for services rendered already. And as you know, as I've said, there's limitations on how you can spend your grant dollars. So this would be coming out of your pockets and not the grant pocket, because the grant won't let you pay for services rendered. Paying a grant writer or consultant a percentage of the grant funding that they secure for an organization of the grant is unethical and in some cases illegal. And I will talk about that here for a second. So the grant solicitation. Grant solicitation has formal guidelines on how dollars can and cannot be spent. This means the budget you submit, you must follow the solicitation guidelines and be specifically related to the proposal you are submitting. What is allowable and what is not allowable. So that's issue number 1 with this myth. Issue number 2, grant award spending. Not spending your grant award dollars in alignment with what you propose is a misappropriation of funds and is considered fraud. Organizations and individuals who are convicted of committing fraud can face criminal law consequences, including civil liabilities and administrative action. Criminal law violations. This is true. Here's the link for it. False statements can be punishable up to 5 years in prison, fines $250,000. Theft of federal property, 10 years in prison. Wire fraud, 20 years in prison plus fines. False claims, punishable for $250,000 for individuals, $500,000 for a company. And don't think they won't find you. They will. I wouldn't even chance it. I just wouldn't. Myth, along with this myth, number 3, ethics. Any reputable grant consultant, grant writer, hopefully is a member of the Grant Professional Association. They follow a code of ethics. It says members cannot accept or pay a finder's fee, commission, or percentage compensation based upon the grant, or shall take care to discourage organizations from taking such payments. So if you're a member of the GPA, ethically, you can't even do it, not forgetting that it's the law, you can't break the law, but you're also held up to a high standard of code of ethics. Number 4 on this, dispelling this myth, outcomes. Grant writers do the same amount of work, no matter whether your proposal is funded or not. They cannot make a grant funder fund you. They cannot make them award you the grant. They have no control over the award process. What you are paying for a grant consultant is to help construct a highly competitive proposal, make sure all your forms are filled out, make sure that it is as competitive as can be, and submitted ahead of deadline. And once it's submitted, it's in the hands of the agency to make a decision. They have no power in making a decision on your proposal. Now, that doesn't mean there are bad grant writers out there. There are, but you have to do your research on that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So number 5, in dispelling this myth, number 9 here, grant readiness. If you don't have any money to pay for a consultant for services rendered, you are not ready for grant. You're just not ready to hire a grant writer. Don't do it. Grants should never be your organization's first dollar. I know there's startup funding out there, but I always say try to get investor dollars, try to get your own capital in the door first. Try to get friends and family to kick in. Do other fundraising in addition to the grant, because grant should not be your only dollar coming in as you're starting up. You should be raising funds from individuals first, people who believe in what you're doing and are willing to make a contribution to get you started. Funding agencies are going to want to see that you have dollars coming in. And we talked about this earlier. Although with the economy the way it is and with COVID-19, there may be startup dollars, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Red flag to be aware of. Any consultant or grant writer who charges a commission either isn't aware of these ethical standards or ignores them, or both. That should be a red flag for you. Ultimately, if they're unethical about how they are paid, what are the other rules that they're willing to break? I wouldn't work with them. Your consultant should never put you at risk for misappropriation of funds, or worse, an audit from the IRS. Find a different consultant right away. Resources. Let's talk about where to find funding. Okay, where to find a grant writer. You can ask your SCORE representative or your mentor. They'll know where to find a reputable grant writer that works within the small business community. The Grant Professional Association is a really good list of grant writers who are members. I want to advise you, not every grant writer works with small businesses. Some work with nonprofits. Some only work with higher ed. Some work in the after-school arena. So you have to find a grant writer that works in your industry and works with small businesses. And of course, as always, you can look at, do some Google research, you'll find somebody. Research tools for grants. Of course, Google. Grants.gov is great for federal funding. It's not all the federal funding, but it's a good chunk of it. I like F6S.com. It's great to find small business challenges if you're doing something innovative and groundbreaking. We mentioned earlier, Startup Fund Hub. You can check that out. COVID-19 funding is available for free. You can access that database for free, the COVID-19 database, to help your business recover from either effects of COVID-19. Maybe you were shut down as a business owner during COVID, or maybe you're trying to stem the tide of COVID, or you're doing research on COVID in some way, shape, or form, that database is free and accessible. Small business innovation research. This is administered by the SBA to 11 agencies: NIH, DoD, Department of, National Science Foundation, Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security. There's 11 agencies that participate in it. The purpose behind this is to spur on innovation. And, if you're doing something innovative and groundbreaking that, you're not sure it's going to work, but it has a high degree of risk, check out SBIR. You never know, there might be funding there to help demonstrate proof of concept and feasibility, ultimately helping you commercialize your idea. So keep that in mind. There is a pathway for that if you're doing something highly innovative. Eileen Fisher. I really like Eileen Fisher. Eileen Fisher has women-owned business grants. They typically do 5 annually. It must be 100% women-owned business, so be advised on that. I really like the Eileen Fisher program, so check them out. We have Activity Hero Business Grant. Typically, cash and prizes is about $15,000. Check them out. Zach Grant is about $2,500 a year. You can apply. A Grant for Greatness hosted by AT&T. I don't know if this one's still around, but I know AT&T does grants fairly regularly for small businesses. It's typically $1,000. Note with this, your business, if it's already established, you can't have revenue more than $20,000. So be advised of that. They're looking for those that are just starting out and just starting to get their feet underneath them. Intuit National Association for Self-Employed, they have about a $4,000 grant. FedEx Small Business Grant has a $25,000 grant. Something about this I want to tell you about the FedEx Small Business Grant. This comes out, I think, once a year-ish. But what I want you to be aware of is that the way that you make it into the finals with this grant is through social media. So once you apply, you get your friends, your family, everyone on social media to vote for your business. And that's how you make it to the finals. And then they make a decision on your business. But I would say, check out this FedEx Small Business Grant. With the Etsy Makers Cities Grant, the amount for this varies. Sometimes they, don't charge you fees on their website. Sometimes it's $5,000, but I would say, check them out. You never know what might be there for you. Chase Main Street Grant, $3 million split to 20 small businesses. It's $150,000 each. It's a big chunk of money. Visa Everywhere Initiative looks for startups with innovation fix, and they offer $50,000 to the final 3 winners. Marriott International, Canva has a food and drink concept grant. Don't know what the amount is. I was trying to see if they're still running it, but check it out. They may have something going on. In the past, it's been $5,000. And then in years past, I'm going back 5 or 6 years now, it was like $20,000. So I don't know if that's still the amount, but check it out. It might be worth looking into. Miller Lite Tap the Future, $200,000 plus seminars and additional resources for startups. There's a Sam's Club grant. Wells Fargo Community Investment, check them out. Walmart Foundation, they have different grant programs. Again, mainly it's offered towards nonprofits, but what we've seen lately happen with them is that they tend to support women-owned and minority-owned and economically disadvantaged small businesses, especially if there's a potential there for you, if you're creating or a crafter or a maker, where your product could be sold in their stores, they would be interested in something like that. Let's see, ExxonMobil has a really great avenue, Coca-Cola, National Association for the Self-Employed, $5,000. Lending Tree, watch out, Lending Tree is part of, they do have a grant, but you may end up on their spam list for lenders, so just a heads up on that one. I'm a little nervous about getting on their list because the last thing I need is more spam in my email. But check them out. There's a way to find their small business grant. And then SCORE, if you need any help at all you need a mentor, you have questions about grants, or you have questions about anything, here's the Buffalo Niagara Score website. You can always call them. Remember, there's no charge for counseling sessions. They serve the 8 counties of Western New York. And remember, it's free, it's confidential, and it's neutral. So, you know, it's just really good business mentoring by experts. And no matter what your topic is, they're there to help you. And then my contact info, you can always find me at ebhoward.com. You can check out what we do. We work specifically with small businesses that are in the startup ecosystem that are trying to solve societal and ecological problems that have the potential to be highly scalable. So that's what we focus on. So I'll open it up to questions. I don't know if there's questions that we want to see.
There are two. I've got 2 questions in the chat, and
Sure.
there may be a couple of additional messages. Okay, this one comes from Heather. My SCORE mentor recommended I create a graph as a visual aid and share it via a link to a page on my website when the grant application asks 2 questions with a 2,000 character limit each. Would you say this fits with following the rules?
Well, I would double check. So in some funding agencies, that may be perceived as circumventing the page length if you have a link on your website to say it's in your application and it's linked to your website. You realize the reviewer is under no obligation to click that link and go to your website. So I would double check and make sure that that is allowable. And they may come back to you, say that the reviewer is under no obligation to go to click that link and go check that out. Other agencies may outwardly say you cannot put links in here and be viewed as circumventing page length. So just double check, talk to the program officer and make sure it's good. You can do that.
Michelle, thank you for that. Michelle asked, can a disabled woman get a grant?
I don't see why not. I don't know that there's grants specifically for your disability, but if you're a business owner, sure, why not?
Okay. One from Amber. Will it be a problem if you had first done a crowdfunding campaign, but couldn't reach the amount needed? Therefore, a grant would be needed.
No.
Would there be a problem?
No, I don't think it would be. I mean, you should disclose that you've done a crowdfunding campaign, and I would say how much you raised, unless you weren't able to access that amount raised. You don't have to say it was a successful crowdfunding campaign, but you can say that you've done a crowdfunding campaign and how much you raised. It may not have been your goal, but they need to see that you have, you've done it, and that's okay. I think that's okay to do. I would just err on the side of transparency with them.
Okay, let's see. We have, okay, from Heather. Sometimes the wording of requirements confuses me. I run an online community. Wait a minute. I keep on jumping around here on my list. Sometimes the wording of the requirements confuses me. I run an online community. Does this qualify as investing in, quote, my community? Or is this generally understood to mean my hometown community?
Yeah, so typically they're talking about geographic location. Although in these mobile times, they may mean that you're trying to reach a certain population or a certain demographic, and that may not necessarily be online. And I would say, talk to the program officer about their definition of community and what they mean by that. And if they come back and say, oh, we mean geographic location or something that doesn't align with what you're trying to do, then that gives you better clarity. And I would say, in general, if something doesn't make sense in the application instructions or the solicitation, contact the program officer. You can say on page 45, line 9, it says this. What do you mean by that? Those poor people at NSF, I call them more times than not, because we need clarification on some nuanced language. It's okay to do that. They expect that. And if there's an email address, email them too. That's okay to do. If it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to the reviewers when they have to look at that scoring rubric. They may have a different definition, and it's better that you are on the same page as those reviewers and get that clarification up front.
Okay. Michael asks, I own a recycling business that works mainly with post-industrial materials. Is there any specific place I can look for environmental and or green energy-based grant opportunities?
Yes. First, I would have you talk to your local economic development agency or your local chamber. And if you're in the Buffalo Niagara area and you happen to be in the town of Amherst, talk to the Amherst Chamber and talk to the Erie County Economic Development Agency. Start there. Then from there, they'll probably have you look at some opportunities at the state level. But I would say if you're outside of Western New York, start with your local Chamber of Commerce. Try to find out who your local economic development agency is, reach out to them, and then go to the state level. Most of those funding opportunities are provided at the state and the EDA level.
Okay, Elizabeth wants to know, is there a difference between art and business grants?
Can you repeat that?
Is there a difference between art and business grants?
Well, business grants are for for-profit entities. Art may be for a nonprofit, or maybe it could be focused on an education or educational institution like a university or a college. So, I mean, unless it specifically says small businesses can apply, even if it's an opportunity that aligns with what you're trying to do, don't apply for it unless you're specifically eligible.
Okay, Catherine is asking, could a student science competition organization fit into a category for a grant award?
It could be, but the school or an after-school program would be the lead applicant. And I would talk to the local school or the after-school program about applying. They typically wouldn't classify as a for-profit entity, and there's specific funding opportunities for that outside of the small business area.
Okay, Joshua is a question. If I have oh boy, I just lost it. Where are you?
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to?
Hold on. I gotta get there again.
There we go.
Just wait a minute. I'm almost there. Okay. This is Barry is asking, are grants available for infrastructure repairs to a privately owned marina in a nationally registered historic district? How's that for specificity?
Yeah. So I would encourage you to talk to your chamber, your local chamber, and then your local economic development agency. But as far as it being on a historical register, there may be state funding for that. But I would start with your chamber and your local economic development agency. Those are good places to start with that.
Jackie wants to know, I am a virtual bookkeeper, but want to expand my business. Is it frowned upon to ask for grants for advertising expenses?
Not necessarily. I would encourage you to read the instructions about how you can spend that money. Some funders are pretty specific and will say you cannot spend money on advertising or you can't spend money on equipment. So double check. And if it's not clear, contact the program officer and say, hey, I want to spend money on advertising. Am I allowed to do this? There's nothing in the instructions that says I can't do this.
Okay. Ron has an interesting question here. Ron says, we're interested in looking for grants to work on our city cemetery. Our committee is looking to be a not-for-profit and acquire a grant or two to start making improvements to the cemetery. How far out of line are we? And how would we have to work in order to get a grant?
So if because you're a nonprofit, I would start by contacting your local United Way. And I qualify this with United. Not all United Ways are the same. Some are better than others. We're very fortunate in Western New York to have a very fantastic United Way. So if you happen to be in Western New York, get a hold of the United Way here in Western New York, and they will guide you to professionals that can help you find funding for what you're trying to do. The second thing I would encourage you to do is talk to your town or municipality to see if they have access to funding or can help you apply for funding with them as a lead applicant. Sometimes towns and municipalities can receive funding to help maintain cemeteries and, just local upgrades, fencing, that sort of thing. So I would say, first things first, talk to the United Way. Second thing I would encourage you to do is talk to your town or municipality where the cemetery is located and start a conversation with them, and then go from there.
Okay. Here's a question. Z wants to know, do funders prefer to see revenue startup funding from an official source? Example, customers, clients, consumers of the product or service, as opposed to family and friends who make donations before they award the grant?
So I would say it's a mix. They want to see that there's investment, so that would be your family and friends. And it depends on what that funder's looking for. Sometimes they'll specifically ask you, do you have revenue coming in the door? Do you have any revenue? Are you still in proof of concept stage? Or, are you still at minimal viable product stage? Sometimes they specifically will ask that question. Sometimes they just want to know, like, do you have investors? Do you have revenue coming in? I would encourage you to talk to the program officer for that, and just get a little bit of clarification about, how would it be perceived if it's you just have investors coming to the table as opposed to, cash transactions or, revenue transactions in some way. Not every opportunity is the same. Some opportunities are expecting you to have a certain amount of revenue. Some are not. Some just want to know what you're doing, and they may not ding you for having nothing. So I would ask.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone that you will be receiving an email no later than tomorrow afternoon. And that email will have a link to tonight's recorded presentation. You'll also get a copy attached to that email will be a PDF copy of the slides. One other question here. Well, there looks like we've got 11 new comments here. So, okay. I'm having problems here. Okay. You got that one with the student science. And okay. If I have a holding company, should I be writing for the holding company or the subsidiaries? If multiple of the subsidiaries qualify for the same grant, should I apply for each individual LLC? If it's through the subsidiary and multiple subsidiaries qualify, wow, this is a long question.
I would be careful, be very, very careful with that. So I use the example with SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. There's specific language in the instructions about subsidiaries and whether or not the actual holding company classifies as a small business. So I would say, as you're looking at this opportunity, double check the qualifications. Is there language like that in the instructions somewhere that you must be designated a small business? I would double check all of those things before you're submitting multiple applications with the subsidiaries, and make sure that they even the holding company meets the criteria. But when all else fails, my number one theme is contact the program officer, ask these questions, because they're going to be able to provide you on point specific answers to this.
Well, we're going to test your tax attorney background with this one. Is grant money taxable?
Technically, it is not taxable, but you need to talk to your accountant and bookkeeper. It gets classified differently on how it's counted towards your income as a small business. And of course, if you're a nonprofit, it's a whole separate ball of wax altogether. But if you're a small business, you need to find a bookkeeper and or a accountant who is familiar with dealing with grant dollars and knows how to properly classify that in your statements to make sure that you don't get dinged.
Are there any grants tailored for conglomerates for growth via vertical integration?
I'm gonna say typically no. Most conglomerates have a substantial revenue stream, and most conglomerates can self-fund their own growth. A lot of the funding opportunities out there are meant for small businesses, meaning you're meeting a specific definition and criteria of what a small business is in the United States. I can't speak to what's outside of the United States. I can only speak to what's in the United States. So I would say double check. You could do the research, dig around, but I would say a good 99.9% of the funding is meant for small businesses.
I'm going to ask Valerie to post her question again. I can't seem to find it when she asked it previously. Valerie, please post your question again. Okay, this is a comment. Thanks for your answers. I think my biggest takeaway from this webinar is to get really good at finding contact information for a program officer.
Yes. Yeah. And not everybody posts their contact info on a solicitation. So when you find a funding opportunity, sometimes it's just an email address, sometimes it's a phone number. You're going to have to dig around to get that info.
Okay. Wow. Jay is wondering whether we could save the chat. I'll see if I can send out also a copy of the chat. Okay. And let me go to the bottom here and see if they'll. Okay, hold on. Okay. Jackie says that, oh, Valerie's question has been answered. So thank you, Valerie. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate your expertise. Jackie says that she would be willing to be contacted via email. Jackie, we don't normally go ahead and support pushing your businesses on here, but if this is for information for somebody else, then go ahead and do it. Let me see. I'm trying to go up here and okay. Thanks again. Thank you. I think I've got most of them here. I want to compliment you both. I've attended multiple webinars. The pace of information on this one has been nothing less than great. Thank you, Joshua. We appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to the bottom of the list again. How many grants did you write before you got your first one?
No, that's a really good question. It wasn't too many because I started out with some like low-hanging fruit. I think I wrote something for a tennis association in Australia and we got it right away. And I was like, really? We got that? I didn't expect that one to land. It helped that I went, when I came out of graduate school, I went into the post-award field. So I had been at the table for after-school programs and education settings when they were writing the proposals and we were writing goals and objectives. The evaluators typically at the table for that, and I would typically be involved in that portion of the grant writing. So I knew a lot already about what had to be done. So it just made that process easier for me.
I think you've answered this one already, but maybe that needs further clarification. Are there any grants for artists or makers who currently sell at art fairs and pop-ups?
You're going to have to do that research. I don't know that one off the top of my head, but if you're a for-profit entity, there might be funding out there. I know we talked about earlier the Etsy and Makerspace that's there, but don't shy away from things like, if I go back on my list here, let me go back. Let me see if I can get this to pop up here. Go back to this. So don't be afraid to go get into Chase Main Street grant or the Visa or FedEx Small Business Grant. Here's the Etsy Maker Cities grant. Don't be afraid to go after some of these because they don't exactly align with what you do as a small business owner. And when I say small business, I mean for-profit business, not nonprofit. These are for-profit entities. Check out things like if you're a women-owned business, just because you're not, if you're in the art space, check this out. If you're a woman-owned business and you're making, if you're handcrafting items, check these things out. Just because they aren't meant specifically for artists, it doesn't mean you may not be eligible. So I would say, check them out. You might be eligible. They may align with what you're doing. And these are just some of the things that are out there. This isn't everything.
Do all grants require you to write an essay?
Most do. I'd say 99% do.
Okay, well, that's
I can't think of a grant opportunity that wants to do it by video. I wish they would. That would make life a lot easier in some instances, or allow you to put some video content, but more often than not, they want you to write.
Okay. We have quite a few thank yous here. And I want to add my personal thank you. One last message here. Should I change my, wait a minute. I got two new things. Should I change my business to a woman-owned business? At this time, I am 50% owner with my husband.
I don't know. That's my quick answer for you. There's pros and cons to it. Just because you become a certified women-owned business doesn't mean that you're going to be automatically eligible for additional funding. I mean, of course, there's funding out there for women-owned businesses, but they may not align with what you're trying to do. So I would say, and it also depends on what you do as a business. It may be beneficial to be a certified women-owned business if you're in a field that's a heavily male-dominated field. The downside of this is, if you do become a women-owned business, especially if you get certified through New York State or the SBA, they're going to ask you to demonstrate that you are in fact a women-owned business and that you have decision-making and authority and oversight. They don't want you to become a certified women-owned business in name only.
Okay. Well, we're getting into specifics here. We have people wanting to know about what's the best source of grants for nonprofits, and have you heard of grants for florists?
Well, if you're a for-profit business, there's grants for you, regardless of what you do. Nonprofit grants, I would check out Foundation Center. That's Foundation Center for the nonprofit space. That will open up all of the foundations that like to give to nonprofits. Not every single foundation's there, but there's a lot in there. So it's called Foundation Center.
Okay. I'm trying to see if I missed anything here. I think I may have missed one or two in line here because my cursor is jumping up and down because I think I have a nervous finger or something. But anyway, in any event, okay, I got one more here. Grants for homeschooling educators. are there grants for homeschooling educators?
Yeah, so it depends on how you're classified. You're going to want to talk to your, so I don't know if you're homeschooling, do you technically classify as a nonprofit or for-profit? And that would depend on, are there funding opportunities for you? So I would say, and if you're not classified as either, I don't know if there is.
Someone's looking for grants for forest school type camps.
Again, it depends on if the school is it a legally formed school? Are you a nonprofit? Are you a for-profit entity? If you're a nonprofit, check out Foundation Center. If you're a for-profit entity, then you want to start with your local economic development agency. And of course, all the tools and resources that we mentioned earlier about funding opportunities.
How do you pay yourself out of a grant?
I don't, it's not allowable. We are fee for service. We charge a flat fee. And I would say, just as advisement to everyone listening, if you hire a reputable grant writer, depending on what you're doing, it can range anywhere from $3,900 to possibly $8,000 per grant, depending on what's going on, depending on the type of support you need. Some grant writers will charge by the hour, some charge flat fees. We charge flat fees. You're paying for someone to fill out the application and write a competitive proposal. And again, grant writers cannot guarantee, imply, or promise that you will get funded. Their job is to get you to write a high quality proposal and have the reviewers give you deep consideration.
Could you tell us a bit more about why you would avoid the AMBER grant besides the fee?
The fee is the only reason I would avoid it. That's the only thing I would avoid. Why I would do that.
Okay.
Just that's my own picadillo about the AMBER grant. Otherwise, yeah, you can look at it.
Heather is going back to the paying yourself. I'm not sure if you've answered this already. I understood that previous question to be asking, how can the business owner pay themselves?
Oh, the business owner. Yeah. So there are budget requirements. So sometimes you may be written in as the principal investigator, the primary investigator, called a PI, and you're going to oversee that project and implement that project. And you would be written in, and you would get an hourly rate or set fee from the grant based upon it. So that's how you would get paid out of the grant. It would be based upon the budget allowables.
A specific question here about any idea if there are grants for people interested in auditioning for voiceover or other casting type roles?
If you are a for-profit entity, meaning you're not just consulting as a 1099, again, I don't know for sure if there is or not, but I would say, if you're a small business, look around, do the research. There may be something, in the arts area surrounding that, but off the top of my head, I don't know for sure if there is or not.
Valerie writes, I'm a for-profit tutoring service and I have my LLC. Are there grants out there for my business?
There is, and I would also encourage you to partner with schools who receive grants, and you can become a service provider to that school. So I would talk to your local school districts. They may receive after-school funding, or they may receive state funding, and you can become a service provider through that grant. So I would talk with them that way. Another avenue would be talk to Yeah, so talk to the school district and talk to after-school programs like the Boys and Girls Clubs. That would be a good avenue to start and get in on those grants.
Okay, well, we have a question, interesting question about what are the downfalls in applying for a grant?
Yeah, so downfalls, not being able to fulfill what you said you were going to do. That's probably the biggest thing. If you don't have a good accountant or a bookkeeper to keep your books straight, you could have all sorts of problems if the IRS wants you to justify expenses. The agency may ask for, proof that you spent your money, and you're going to have all sorts of bookkeeping. So there's that. Yeah.
And I think related to that is a question about the downfalls of applying for your own grant versus having a grant writer.
So it's kind of a, darned if you do, darned if you don't scenario. Some of the paperwork can be really detailed and detail oriented, and yeah, sure, you can do it yourself. I would say, follow some of the guidelines that I put forward. Like if it's less than 30 calendar days away, don't go near it. There's typically federal registrations that have to be completed, and those take time to validate. There's lots of paperwork to be filled out. Yes, certainly you can do it on your own, but you also have to decide what's your time worth. Is it worth handing that over to someone who has submitted applications to that funder before and been successful and knows what they're doing and can take that off your plate so you can run your business? Or, and I get it, you want to do it yourself, that's fine too. It might be worth bringing in a grant writer or consultant to come in and do a critical review of the application when you're done to make sure that you dotted every I and crossed every T. They don't necessarily have to write it for you, but they can certainly help you make sure, just fine tune and refine it and give you feedback like, hey, you forgot to answer this section, or hey, your budget, you have this unallowable expense in here, you got to detail this out. Just a second set of eyes to make sure that you're doing what you want. And just really depends on what your tolerance level as a business owner is. Some people have capacity and time to do it themselves. By all means, hammer down, do it. But then other people, yourself, whether or not you have the capability of taking something on like that. And if it's easier to delegate it out, you should delegate it out. Maybe you want to do it yourself as a learning experience and then bring in a consultant to just have that critical oversight.
Okay, well, there's one here. I do believe in your presentation, you mentioned about at least one organization that may have some COVID relief grants available. Are there others that you're aware of?
So right now we have, let me go back to that link. So Startup Fund Job, we keep free access to COVID. So if it's coming out of any place in the United States, check, you can have a look. We try to update that database a couple of times a week. Yeah, the list is shrinking, unfortunately, but, check it out. There might be something in there. There might be, there may not be, I don't know. Just depends on what you're doing. Like I said, the funding's dwindling, but it doesn't hurt to check it out. It's free to access to the COVID database. So.
Any tricks of the trade or insider tips worth sharing before we depart?
Oh yeah, I got one.
Information.
Yeah, yay. So my number one thing, think of grants as a lottery ticket. Doesn't matter if you scratched the right number or picked your own numbers or did auto pick, there's no guarantee that you're going to get funded. And think of a grant opportunity as a lottery ticket. You can have every I dotted, every T crossed. You could have the best proposal on the planet, and what plays well with one funder and they love it and they eat it up and they fund you, and another funder is going to tell you you're insane. It's okay. It's okay to get rejected on your grant too. But you have to be persistent. You have to reapply. Just because you try it once and you're not successful, try again. Keep trying, keep knocking on the door, keep knocking. That's my best advice for you. If you get rejected, apply again, unless they say you're not allowed to apply again. Some funders are pretty specific about that. Others don't have any specificity. You can reapply as many times as you want. Of course, only if you correct the errors that they found or the feedback that the reviewers gave to you. But I would typically say just rejection's hard. It's really hard to take, but reapply. Always reapply. Always reapply.
Okay, we're getting close to our closeout time here. I'm going to give you one last question, and I'm going to suggest that any questions we have remaining, that the people that have those questions, maybe would you be open to having them go directly to you with those questions?
They absolutely can.
Okay.
You can get right to, let me see if I can get to it. You can get right to our website. I do have open office hours, so I'm, happy to, it books up in advance. I think I'm booked all the way up until October right now, but open office hours, if you've got just questions, you can book me for open office hours. I'll give you a half hour of my time and answer all your questions. Any of the other time that's available is meant for, potential clients, the clients that are serious about wanting to work with us. So I would encourage you to book open office hours for any Q&A. And I realize that may mean that you're waiting until October to talk to me, and that's fine.
Okay. So here's your last question. I know each grant is different, but what are some typical things grants usually want you to keep track of?
Yeah. Well, let's start with this, your resume. They're always going to want to demonstrate your experience and capabilities and your team's capabilities as well. So as a business owner, as a small business owner, it's imperative that you keep everyone's resumes up to date. So maybe you have a new invention, maybe you were able to sell 5,000 widgets, maybe someone got, is now a director or a CTO or CI, whatever it is. Make sure everyone's resumes are up to date, because you're going to have to draw on that expertise and the experience. The other thing, they're going to want to know what you do as a business. So you have to be able to explain that. So it's best that that information, you already have that at the ready. Like, what do you do? How are you founded? Who's your target audience? Who's your target client? They're going to want to know that information. So be prepared to speak to that. If you have revenue, they're going to want to know about that. Some funders will, some will not. They're going to want to know about investors. Some will, some will not. They're going to want to know about patents. If you filed any provisional patents, if you got awarded any patents or publications, they're going to want to know about those things. So anything surrounding expertise, skill set, knowledge, have that at the ready. They're going to want to know, and you have to be able to speak to that to demonstrate that you're competent and capable of lifting a grant off the ground should it be awarded.
Okay, well, I want to sincerely thank you on behalf of our attendees and SCORE, Buffalo Niagara, SCORE in general, and the SBA for your presentation tonight. Christine, there's a ton of information and great opportunity for our attendees to ask you questions and to get answers. I particularly liked your comment that talking about grants should never be an organization's first source of funds. I know for small businesses, a number of them have come to me as a mentor and have said, gee, I want to get a grant for going ahead and running my business. And your comment about should never be the first source of funds was particularly telling for me.
Yeah. It's one of the things that we tell our clients all the time. Don't let it be your first source of funding.
Okay, thanks again, Christine.
Thank you.
And for all of our attendees, again, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording of this presentation, plus a PDF of the slides. And I'll see if I can get a copy of the chat also included with that email. So thanks again for being with us tonight. Look forward to having you at future webinars, SCORE webinars, and hope you have a great evening. Good night, Christine.
Good night.